Deep in the heart of a continent, the rhythms of life merge across 5 Great Lakes. Here, inland waters that touch northern forest and western plain flow on to the salty waters of the Atlantic. In Moby Dick, Herman Melville hailed them as grand freshwater seas, with many of the ocean's noblest traits. Viewed from space, the Great Lakes are North America's most prominent inland feature and hold 1/5 of the surface fresh water on the planet. Feared by mariners for centuries, these can be treacherous waters. Waters that have swallowed ships hundreds of feet long. This region was carved out by glacial ice. Along the lake shores, people brave elemental forces when cold returns each year. Along the shores, a proud people celebrate ancestral ties to the wilderness. Along the shores, urban empires built on industry reach skyward. Yet life on the Great Lakes is delicate and vulnerable. Toxic chemicals from the air and the water can turn birds into freaks. Here, most of the lake trout were once destroyed by a diabolical fish. And today, the waters that millions depend on for drinking, electricity, and recreation are threatened by a tiny mussel. Though vast in extent, these waters have their limits, and human abuses have pushed them to the brink. Yet millions in the United States and Canada cherish them for all they provide. Deep in the heart of a continent is a blue realm, both powerful and delicate. Great Lakes, fragile seas. Beyond lofty dunes on Lake Michigan's northeast coast, blue water stretches beyond the horizon. Long ago, across this expanse, settlers first beheld these shores from the decks of tall ships. Today, on these waters, the schooner Malabar is on another voyage of discovery.
Got it.
It's in here. Okay, let go. You can slack her off.
Tom Kelly, an aquatic biologist, opens youthful eyes to the mysterious world beneath the surface of the lake.
So we're looking at sort of a time capsule here of what kinds of materials were drifting into the bay.
In layers of mud, natural history and human history are intertwined. Here, sawdust remains from a century ago when logging changed the region, and Kelly's ancestors first settled along these shores.
My great-grandfather was a fisherman, and my grandfather. It feels good to be working in this environment.
Those are all the plankton.
It's hard to describe to somebody who's never seen a lake this big, to talk about fresh water that extends for further than the eye can see. It's really a different kind of place, a real special place. It's the kind of place that you can, I think, fall in love with.
You with the tweezers, get your head in there and look for little things that move.
These school children soon learn that the lakes are alive. Tiny creatures burrowed in the mud are part of a vast aquatic ecosystem.
See how big he is?
Yeah.
See, he's got this long, spiky tail.
If they can see that it's a special place, it's just not a basin full of water. There's a lot of things living in there, a lot of things that make that their home. That's the whole idea behind the school ship.
See his eyes? I see his tail.
Aboard the Malabar, students discover residents of the largest system of fresh surface water on Earth. On a sunny day, connections are made with 5 Great Lakes that are, like children, still delicate and young. "20,000 years ago, the Great Lakes were not yet born. Across a cold and desolate wasteland, the face of the earth was slowly gouged out by a sheet of ice 1 mile thick. This icy shroud covered the top of the continent for thousands of years until the planet began to thaw. A warming climate sent the glacier on a northern retreat. Along its receding edge, the frozen mantle gave way to restless waters that shifted and spread until they became the Great Lakes of today. Lake Ontario is tied to the Atlantic by the St. Lawrence River and by the Niagara River to Lake Erie. Lake Huron is dotted with 30,000 islands. And Lake Michigan is linked by a waterway to the Mississippi. In area, Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world. Together, these Great Lakes contain almost 20% of the surface fresh water on Earth. What the Ice Age left behind are wonders to behold. An endless cascade thunders over Niagara, fed by inland seas to the west. The volume of water in these 5 lakes is difficult for the mind to grasp. 8,000 miles of coastline contain 6 quadrillion gallons of water. Enough water to flood the 48 states to a depth of 10 feet. The release of the glacier's icy grip brought new life to the lakes. Migrants arrived to inhabit a pristine realm. Across these waters, a web of life was woven, and an ecosystem was born. Aboriginal nomads settled along the wooded shore, and for centuries, their descendants hunted and fished the bounty of the lakes. In the 1600s, European explorers came searching for a route to the Orient. On their heels came adventurers who made their fortunes in the fur trade. Then settlers arrived to fulfill their dreams in a land of promise. Fishermen from Norway, farmers from Germany, coal miners from Wales came with their families in wooden ships. Along the shorelines, civilization began to sprout. Cities like Toronto were framed with virgin timber from the North Woods. Silent forests now echoed with the sound of the lumberjack. Primeval woodlands were carried away on the swollen streams of spring. In coal mines to the south, lives were spent to fuel a growing inland empire with natural riches from deep in the earth. At the turn of the century, cargoes crossed the lakes on steel ships called whalebacks. They passed from lake to lake through rivers and locks that would become some of the busiest commercial channels in the world. The need for raw materials grew, and with it came new tools and more efficient technology in the coal fields of Ohio and Pennsylvania and the iron mines of Minnesota and Michigan. In shipyards, an armada of ever larger vessels was built. On crowded waterways, this freshwater fleet united a vast region. Into ships flowed iron ore, bound for Cleveland, Gary, Hamilton, and Detroit. where it was transformed into steel in the fires of the open hearth. From Poland, Italy, Ireland, and rural America, people flocked to urban centers to become part of the largest industrial machine on Earth. Working together, this booming labor force helped build two wealthy, powerful nations. After World War II, an age of prosperity flourished across the region, in the plains and prairies to the west. From North America's breadbasket, wheat was shipped from inland ports to feed the world. Across the centuries, people and goods borne on ships have transformed the region. The skylines of great cities are linked along the water's edge with the rustic shapes of village and farm. Today, 30 million people call this home. Not long ago, boundless wilderness sprawled along these shores. Now, cities glow like the starry night. Far from the cities and towns is a vast wetland that merges with the waters of Lake Superior. Over the centuries, many coastal wetlands in North America have vanished in the wake of progress. But on the Bad River Indian Reservation, this watery domain has remained unchanged in 2,000 years. Here, early native people discovered wild rice. Every August, the Chippewa Indians still gather the ripened seed with techniques passed down from their ancestors. Tom O'Connor learned to use his rice sticks from his father. With them, he will gather 200 pounds of rice to feed his family in the coming year.
We go along, we make music with these sticks. We get into the rhythm, what they call it. It's just a steady rhythm all day. Like a drum beat almost to you. Every swing of the stick is food. When the Creator makes everything, our teachings are that everything has a spirit because He made it. Rice, water spirits, they take care of you. It's food that comes out of the water.
To mark the harvest, the Chippewa gather on the reservation to offer thanks to the Great Spirit that pervades all things in the natural world. A ritual dance celebrates the sacred gift of wild rice that has enabled the Chippewa and their culture to survive. For centuries, wild rice has flourished in these wetlands. And today, a plant ecologist studies the secret of its longevity.
Okay, 196. 3 leaves.
Jim Meeker has learned that the survival of wild rice depends on the tidal action of Lake Superior.
35 tall.
The dynamics in the system is everything. I mean, without the dynamics in a system like this, you lose the wild rice wetland.
Stem is broken just over the first aerial leaf.
Lake Superior protects the wild rice with sporadic flooding, which suppresses plants that would otherwise take over. Controlling water levels would deprive the wetland of its life force. By leaving the waters unchecked, the Chippewa allow the rice plant to survive.
It's very important. Once you start to stabilize the system, it changes. And that's why the system is so unique. We have a system here that's 12,000 acres. It's a wild rice dominated system. It's a freshwater estuary on the shores of Lake Superior. And without the fluctuations that Lake Superior provides, it's gone.
To survive, wild rice must seed itself year after year. Meeker finds evidence that the Chippewa let most of the seed return to the water.
Traditionally, the Native Americans would go to a spot and go through with a canoe and knock the rice off maybe 3 times during the whole period. But there's always some rice that survives that doesn't go in the canoe and falls into the water. The reason perhaps that this area is still pristine and not developed is that there's maybe a different ethic involved. There's not this drive to go out and dominate a system and to change it.
And you don't knock straight down, you try to go slide it off like that.
Okay.
John Wolfe, the tribal game warden, passes his rice sticks to his granddaughter, Katie Buffalo.
Breaking them. You just kind of slide off the rice and it works better that way.
Okay.
Then somebody else can come through here tomorrow and get some more rice off and it slide her off like that. That's the way. You'll learn.
Some year.
You have to learn because when I get too old to make rice, you're going to have to. That's the way.
There's a bug crawling up my leg.
Huh?
There's a bug crawling up my leg and it tickles.
Please don't worry about the bugs.
It tickles.
We know they're a nuisance, but I think we have to have them.
Or else we wouldn't have rice?
Yes, we wouldn't have rice. That's the way it works.
There is much to learn about gathering rice, but John Wolfe is patient.
I'd say within 5 years, you'll be a pretty good ricer.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah, it doesn't come with one season. If you rice real hard, you might have enough to stuff a turkey.
Rice is gathered on a summer day, and tradition is planted in a new generation. Another season passes in a wetland where the destinies of man and plant are mingled with the waters of Lake Superior. Along these shores, the natural rhythms of the lakes and the culture of a people are woven together. Here, life must adapt to seasonal changes, born on the winds of autumn. As it sweeps over Lake Superior, Arctic air gathers moisture from the water and brings early snows to Bayfield, Wisconsin. Two miles across the lake lies Madeline Island, a popular summer playground. By November, seasonal residents have gone home. Now islanders go about their daily lives and prepare for the isolation of winter. On the Great Lakes, ice is an element man has never been able to control. Inevitably, there comes a day when the island ferry is useless. After the ferry makes its last trip, Arnie Nelson brings his wind sled out of the garage. For 50 years, wind sleds have linked Madeline Island to the mainland. Using ingenuity and spare parts, residents discovered a way to live with ice. And wind sleds became a local tradition that Arnie inherited from his father. Today, the Nelson Wind Sled takes islanders to school and work and brings food and mail to the island.
It's a heavy-duty Everglade boat with a 454 Chevrolet 425-horse engine, 2-to-1 reduction gear, swinging 2 propellers, with an airplane, jet airplane, landing gear, nose wheel for steering, and rudders for steering on the back. 1 comfortable seat, 3 that aren't. There's no springs or shock absorbers on it. If there's a bump out there, you go over a 2 or 3 inch crack and come down on hard ice, you come down hard. It's very bumpy, very loud, and fairly cold.
It's a little risky out there when you got that thin ice and you got those hard crosswinds. The sled wants to go sideways and it breaks in and kind of tips your whole load. So it's not the best conditions.
The ride was wild. When you break, when the right side of the boat would break in, we'd all have to jump over to the other side and balance it. But it was an exciting ride. Yeah, thumbs up.
I'm not doing it again, I'll tell you.
Yeah. And they do a real service for the island. They have for years. They tell you when to cross, when not to cross. If they don't go and they say it's not safe to go across that ice, you don't go across that ice. You know, if you're going to get sick, you want to go to the best doctors. If you're in trouble, you want to go to the best attorneys. And when you're crossing this ice up here, you talk to Arnie and Ronnie. Those are the guys that know it real well.
Making up to 12 trips a day, Arnie Nelson brings the outside world to a tiny island. But as temperatures drop further, islanders anticipate the bumpy ride will soon be over. Arnie's brother Wayne relies on an intimate knowledge of ice. When it is thick enough to stand on, his work begins. He makes a straight line from the island to the mainland with a trail of discarded Christmas trees. Every 200 feet, he plants a tree through the skin of ice. Alone, he makes his way to Bayfield, across a vista that evokes those forces that gave birth to the lakes. When the ice is thicker, a line of Christmas trees will guide islanders across the frozen lake. Ironically, the winter cold brings relief from isolation, and now it lures islanders onto the dormant lake.
First race, hole 5, 36, 33, 50. Second race, 88, 55, 69, 01. Come on, Susie!
On Sunday afternoons, enthusiasts from miles around compete with islanders on ice that is now 12 inches thick.
haven't had any serious accidents on the track. Nobody's rolled. It's not like if your car's parked on blacktop or something, you hit it, it doesn't want to move. It's on ice, it just kind of skips out of the way like a hockey puck. Nobody's gotten hurt, and if everybody plays safe, we can keep playing this game.
In shaping the character and spirit of the people, the Great Lakes have given birth to many local traditions along their shores. When the ice melts in early spring, shipmasters from the U.S. and Canada gather with their families at Mariners Church in Detroit.
Almighty God,
as the shipping season begins, it is time again to bless the men and the vessels of the Great Lakes Fleet.
we thank Thee for the creation of these waters that afford life, commerce, and pleasure. Be Thou present with all Thy children who sail upon the waters of the Great Lakes.
It is a time to remember a maritime tradition and a time to honor the dead.
Sense of Thy mercies. We hereby gratefully remember all the mariners of our Great Lakes who have lost their lives by storm,
Plying the waters of the Great Lakes is dangerous work. Since recorded history, they have claimed over 10,000 vessels. Such a record of death and destruction ranks them as some of the most treacherous waters on Earth. In the late 1800s, 6,000 ships were wrecked in just 20 years. In 1913, 250 lives were lost in a 4-day storm that wrecked 71 boats. Off Whitefish Point in Lake Superior, a giant ore carrier vanished in 1975. An investigation of the tragedy is now underway. Historian Fred Stonehouse remembers.
There's theories, there's ideas, and there's suggestions, but we can't explain why this modern 729-foot ore carrier literally was destroyed by the power of Lake Superior.
On June 7, 1958, 10,000 people gathered for the launch of the Edmund Fitzgerald. At the time, the world's largest freshwater vessel. The Edmund Fitzgerald broke many cargo records in her glory days. But her glory days would end on November 10, 1975. Over Lake Superior, a storm from the south clashed with a mass of cold air, causing a sudden violent change in the weather. As darkness enveloped the lake, 25-foot seas and gale-force winds hammered at the Edmund Fitzgerald as she plunged on through the storm. She had been taking on water, but in the early evening from the pilot house radio came a reassuring message. We are holding our own. These were the final words from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Moments later, the ship disappeared. With no survivors, the Fitzgerald's final moments have never been resolved. An unmanned mini-submarine helps search for answers, guided by its designer, Chris Nicholson. Polarized glasses give him a three-dimensional look at a dark world 500 feet below. The forward section rests upright on the bottom. The ship's bell is still bolted to the deck. Steel hull plates are torn like paper. The stern section is upside down, revealing the massive propeller. The Edmund Fitzgerald was snapped in two. No trace of the 29 crew members is found.
I'm not sure that's an accurate.
On the research vessel, past events are brought to the surface, and speculation about the Fitzgerald's last moments continues.
That damage we saw was in the middle of the ship. You could say, okay, now we're talking metal failure and maybe cold steel failure or something like the old Bessemer process, but it isn't there.
Deep beneath Lake Superior lies a drama about the power of the Great Lakes and the fragility of human affairs. A story told again and again across these inland seas. Ashore, a mariner's warning illuminates the night. A reminder that these waters are like a wild creature, untamable and free. In the fearful strength of the lakes lies a sublime beauty that people seek out along the water's edge. A beauty to touch and be near. For centuries, the Great Lakes were seen as a resource that could never wear out. But in the 1960s, ominous problems began to surface. For many years, the waste from factories, farms, and cities flowed unchecked into the lakes. And finally, the stress began to show. In Lake Erie, an explosion of algae growth turned waters to pea soup. Fish suffocated for lack of oxygen. Beaches were closed. Eagles and falcons fell victim to toxic contamination. Alewives fouled Lake Michigan's shore. Public outrage was ignited when Ohio's Cuyahoga River actually burst into flames. And Cleveland became famous as the city where the river caught fire. The years of prosperity had taken their toll, and now the entire Great Lakes ecosystem was threatened with collapse. In 1972, Canada and the United States recognized that only a joint effort could save the Great Lakes. President Richard Nixon and Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau signed a landmark agreement that, for the first time, recognized the Great Lakes as a single, closed ecosystem. A commitment was made to control wastes before they entered the lakes. Never before had environmental cleanup been attempted on this scale. Clinton, Ohio, is one of many resort towns on the southern Lake Erie shore. 20 years ago, there was nothing to celebrate here. But today, a fish is honored with a parade down Main Street. The return of the walleye to Erie's waters is a source of regional pride and revenue.
Please step up to the table. As your fish are measured, please watch. And if you have discrepancy, please ask
The annual walleye tournament offers biological proof that Erie's health is improving. In the 1960s, anglers had little hope of hooking a walleye. Now record lengths are measured each year as fish stocks rapidly return.
29.2.
All right.
Sport fishing has become an industry that brings about $4 billion to the region each year. In 1989, 18 million pounds of walleye were caught in Lake Erie alone. Though there is no guarantee every catch will win a prize. On the surface, the lakes look better, but below, the balance of life is still precarious.
22, 23 incher.
In 1959, the St. Lawrence Seaway opened the Great Lakes to ocean shipping. Today, steel giants from 50 nations move from lake to lake through narrow locks. These engineering marvels raise and lower ships that weigh thousands of tons. But making the lakes accessible to the world has made them vulnerable to change. Through man-made channels have come unwanted guests. Niagara Falls. For centuries, an impassable barrier between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie for large ships. But in the 1920s, an old canal around the falls was widened and deepened. The Welland Canal was a triumph of technology that would permit large ships to circumvent the falls. But Niagara Falls had also been a biological barrier that kept aquatic invaders from entering the lakes. The canal would open Pandora's box. Into this delicate ecosystem swam a parasitic creature from the ocean's depths. Sucking life from its prey, the sea lamprey changed life in these waters forever. Fish populations, already weakened by overfishing, were decimated by the sea lamprey. In the 1940s and 50s, it virtually destroyed commercial fishing, and the economic impact was staggering. The sea lamprey is a modern survivor of an ancient line of jawless, boneless fish that dates back to a time before the dinosaurs. With a suction cup mouth and inward pointing teeth, it can kill 40 pounds of fish in its lifetime. The extent of the lamprey's devastation caught everyone by surprise. Intensive research discovered its weak point. The lamprey spawns in streams. Here, the tiny larvae burrow in the mud for several years before heading downstream to wreak their havoc. Today, U.S. Fish and Wildlife teams use electric shock to flush larvae from stream beds in order to monitor their populations. In the late 1950s, after exhaustive tests, a magic bullet was found, a chemical called TFM. When carefully added to the water, TFM kills the larvae without harm to other fish. Now, every year from April to October, streams are treated with the chemical. Without it, the Great Lakes would be a biological disaster. With its continued use, the lamprey is kept at bay. To restore the balance of species devastated by the lamprey, federal, state, and provincial governments stock the lakes with millions of fish each spring. Today, 25,000 trout are dumped from a single truck into Lake Huron. Born in a hatchery, a small yearling may someday be a 10-pound game fish, but only if it can survive in the big lake. These fish now become part of the food web. They must elude hungry predators while they compete with one another in the search for food, microscopic animals called zooplankton. Today, a new creature has invaded the Great Lakes. Ray Barnheisel, a graduate student at the University of Michigan, has cast her net for a tiny zooplankton that entered the lakes in ballast water discharged from a foreign ship.
Those spines really get stuck in the net.
Though small in size, it may become a big menace. For Ray, understanding its effect on the Great Lakes is a passion.
We've been guessing about the Great Lakes for all this time now. We hypothesize and estimate without going out and finding the real truth.
This bizarre creature is named Bythotrephes, a carnivorous animal with a single eye, barbed appendages, and a bony spine 4 times its body length. This ballast water stowaway from the Soviet Baltic region is now a permanent resident of the Great Lakes, and fish here have never seen anything like it.
You know what I'm noticing too is their spines are very fragile. When I see it by itself swimming, or I hold it on my finger, I have a lot of empathy for it. When I feed it to fish, I think of it as somehow more menacing, because the small fish that I feed it to can't handle it very well. They're very wary and cautious of it. So it seems to take these 2 roles.
Fish 7.
One of being very helpless when it's by itself, but being quite capable when it's in the presence of a fish.
To study its effect on the food web, Barnheisel videotapes its interactions with hungry young fish.
Bythotrephes, reject. Take. Reject.
Expecting a meal, the fish swallows a sword instead,
Reject.
and soon learns to leave Bythotrephes alone.
Come on back, fish.
Oh, wait, I'm looking for Bythotrephes. Maybe. All right.
We're going, all right.
I think we just saw it rejected.
With her professor, Charles Kerfoot, Ray suspects its effect on fish populations will be severe. Bythotrephes eats the same food as young fish. Protected by a barbed spine, it is a serious competitor, not a victim, leaving young fish with less to eat. Ray's research will help fish managers plan for the future.
What's important now is to chart its effect, see how it influences the Great Lakes, in what way, to find out if it's going to stabilize, when it's stabilized, but just to be able to monitor these Great Lakes a little bit better.
The discharge of ballast water into the Great Lakes has brought other invaders as well. In Lake Erie, Canadian scientists Joe Leach and John Fitzsimons are tracking down a new creature that arrived in 1988 and by mid-1990 had spread from Lake Erie to the far corners of the Great Lakes. Canada and the United States have mobilized research teams to study a small mollusk called the zebra mussel. By pooling information, they hope to find its Achilles heel. Time is of the essence. On the bottom of Lake Erie are limestone reefs, where for thousands of years, fish like walleye have laid their eggs. Now the bottom is layered with zebra mussels. The zebra mussel is a native of the Black and Caspian Seas and gets its name from its stripes. These thumbnail-sized creatures grow on top of one another, reaching densities of 60,000 per square foot. Zebra mussels attach firmly to almost any surface. Fish nets, boat hulls, buoys, even a car that was once underwater. By clogging pipes and intakes, it threatens the water that industries and millions of consumers depend on for drinking and electricity. Not even bottom dwellers are safe from the invasion, which may soon spread to the Hudson River, the Mississippi, and beyond. Zebra mussels are also changing the food web. They consume nutrients that all species need to survive. Each year, they filter out almost half the chlorophyll, the primary food source, from Lake Erie's western basin. Divers collect water and rock samples to study how zebra mussels alter the delicate chemistry around spawning fish eggs. Such knowledge will help predict the future of Lake Erie fish.
Oh, wall to wall. Just wall to wall mussels. Just sort of carpet of mussels on the bottom there.
Little mussels on top of big mussels.
Analysis begins while samples are fresh.
We usually think in terms of pollution as the chemical pollution, but this is biological pollution. The Great Lakes are particularly vulnerable to that type of disruption, where one stress can disrupt the system, which allows another one to come in and cause further disruption. And I think the zebra mussel has brought this to the forefront.
The past has shown that to ignore disturbances in this closed ecosystem has perilous consequences. Trying to stay ahead is a daunting challenge, but is perhaps a small price to pay for all these lakes provide. In springtime, winged creatures guided by instinct push northward across these waters. At Whitefish Point, bird watchers witness a migration that has occurred since glacial times, when birds first found homes along these shores. Birds have long fascinated people with their grace and beauty. But they are also helping scientists to better understand a chronic environmental problem brought about by a long legacy of industrial pollution. For many birds, like terns and cormorants, migration ends on offshore islands and breeding begins. Even in these remote places, miles from civilization, life is under siege from chemical contamination. Jim Ludwig, president of the Michigan Audubon Society, surveys bird colonies around the Great Lakes.
6-2s.
With his assistant, Heidi Oman, he is learning how newborn birds are affected by toxic substances within the egg.
It's a pernicious kind of contamination that is very hidden, very easy to gloss over. But the wildlife show you clearly that there's a problem there that's persisting.
This bird has been left by its mother to die. With a twisted bill, it cannot feed itself. It will give its life to help Ludwig identify what chemicals sealed its fate. Both airborne and waterborne chemicals contaminate the Great Lakes, and though many are now banned, surprisingly, they do not disappear.
There's something very unique here about these waters. You have to recognize that Lake Michigan takes 99 years to get rid of its water, to have the water exchange in it. We're probably seeing bioeffects from materials that were discharged 20 years ago. It's simply taken 20 years for the water to mix around and get up there. But we have to run that down yet, to be sure.
Contamination ends the life of many birds before they hatch. Ludwig collects these stillborn eggs for chemical analysis. Data gathered over time will help determine how chemicals move inside this closed ecosystem. They do not dissolve, drain away, or lie dormant. Instead, they are eaten by tiny organisms and enter the food web. As smaller organisms are eaten by larger creatures, the concentration of chemicals increases to deadly levels.
We think that based on our work and other work done in Canada, that the amount accumulated from the water to the fish is about 1 million-fold. And from the fish to the bird, it increases another 30 to 50 times. But by the time you get to the bird, there's somewhere between 30 and 50 million times as much contamination as is in the water. They do indicate that there is, you might say, trouble in paradise. They are a harbinger of things to expect in any species that depends upon fish from the Great Lakes. It doesn't matter if you're a turtle, a mammal, or a bird. They're all showing the same suite of bioeffects. We'd be absolutely stupid to think that it isn't going to involve human beings, too.
To protect people, governments set guidelines for safe consumption of fish. But birds cannot choose what they eat. Victims of the past, they are a warning that abuses of the Great Lakes today will have future consequences. By shedding light on their fragile dynamics, Jim Ludwig is trying to protect the lake's future for all who live here. In Hamilton, Ontario, the future of the Great Lakes is being discussed. From across the region, concerned people like Jim Ludwig have gathered to lay their hopes and concerns before the International Joint Commission.
9 out of 10 Canadians feel that their health has already been affected by environmental contaminants.
Great Lakes problems must be viewed...
At a public forum, the commissioners hear testimony from hundreds of people with diverse priorities who offer advice on the future of the ecosystem.
Central to all of this are two questions that you must ask yourselves. Who do I work for as a commissioner? And to whom do I owe my loyalty? I believe that you must be loyal to the public interest directly and always guided by a very simple precept. Do what is right for the resource, regardless of the political consequences.
The Commissioner's final report states, our generation has failed to realize that what we are doing to the Great Lakes, we are doing to ourselves and to our children. International promises to protect the lakes remain unfulfilled, but from across the Great Lakes, people gather to meet the challenges ahead. In the 1600s, a Jesuit missionary wrote, I could not conceive that these lakes should discharge at the falls, yet not drown a good part of America. For centuries, the Great Lakes have symbolized the unlimited potential of the New World. Brave mariners risked their lives to help build a civilization. Throughout history, the Great Lakes have posed challenges that have been met with determination and courage. They have shaped a tenacious spirit and a proud heritage. Now the Great Lakes are a laboratory of global importance. Scientists are vigilant, knowing that what happens today will affect tomorrow. The fate of the Great Lakes will soon be in the hands of a new generation. Ancient wetlands yield another harvest.
That's good.
Traditions are planted for the future. A tall ship sails toward new horizons. Perhaps memories of exploring blue waters on a sunny day will be the inspiration to protect them in the years ahead.
And so maybe by starting with these young kids, we'll have the next generation know more about it. And I think that if you know about it and you care about it, you'll love it and then take care of it.
Here, there is hope that these fragile seas will live on in the care of generations still to come.
Next week at this time, The Infinite Voyage will show us how scientists are developing artificial materials from sweeteners to skin. Be with us next Wednesday night at 8 for Materials by Design. And if you stay with 11 now, you'll enjoy Andrew Lloyd Webber talking with David Frost.